The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Kendall Trump with Grain Journal Magazine in Decatur, Illinois. Welcome to How to Lead a Work Group Through Change. This is the fifth in a series of webinars to be presented by GEAPS and Grain Journal Magazine in 2019. Today's webinar is sponsored by M&M Specialty Services. M&M specializes in protecting your people and your products with the best in quality and affordability in personal protection products, grain protectants, fumigants, and services. They are based in Leavenworth, Kansas. Today's webinar is also sponsored by VAA LLC, who has provided engineering and design services in the agribusiness industry since its founding in 1978. Working with owners, equipment vendors, and design-build contractors, the firm specializes in bulk commodity handling facilities, including slip-form design, material handling, transportation, and export. They are based in Minneapolis, Minnesota. Today's presenter is Mike Gregory. Mike is a dynamic, energetic, and passionate international speaker that offers keynote, workshop, seminar, and executive forum presentations, taking advantage of the collaboration effect. We do have two polling questions for you today. First, how many people are viewing at your location? Okay, and our next question, are you a GEAPS member? Thank you all for your participation. As a note, today's webinar is being recorded and it will be posted to our website, grainnet.com, within 24 hours. All registrants will also receive an email containing a link to the recording the day following the presentation. When it comes to asking questions today, you may submit your questions at any time during our presentation. In the questions box at the right-hand side of your screen, we will be answering your questions during a Q&A session following our presentation. At this time, Mike, can you please do a voice check?
I'm here.
Great, we can hear you. And now, can you please show us your screen?
Get there. I'm moving the mouse over the other screen. It's just taking a second to get there.
Sure.
There it is. There we go.
There we go. Everything looks good. Ladies and gentlemen, here is Mike Gregory.
Well, thank you very much. It's my pleasure to be with you here today. I'm going to be talking to you about how to lead work groups through change. I am also the founder of two firms. One is called The Collaboration Effect. We'll be talking about that. And the other is simply Michael Gregory Consulting, LLC. I first learned about collaboration shortly after I was born, and I joined my twin brother, Mark, and my four other siblings. Unless there be any question about that, here's a picture with, that's me, Mike on the left, and my brother, Mark on the right. And we were learning how to row the boat, so to speak, together, even at the age of 2. And I'm going to work with you today to row the boat, work together, and see what we can do to work going forward. I'm taking advantage of the collaboration effect. It's all about enhancing relationships, resources, and revenues. I help firms that want to grow faster and more efficiently by taking advantage of the collaboration effect. And today we're going to address one of my presentations dealing specifically with working through change. As a result of today's session, you'll be able to define the collaboration effect. It actually is something in neuroscience being applied here in a work group setting. Anticipate resistance to change and how to address it. explain how to focus on values and not beliefs, demonstrate active learning with an actual exercise, and you're going to leave with some action items to lead your work group through change. And tomorrow when you receive elements from today's presentation, the PDF, you'll also receive a little Word document where you can put in action items for yourself to take going forward. We have a lot to cover here in 50 minutes, and I'm going to make an assumption that I just read this to you, but as we go forward, I'm not going to be reading to you. I'm going to take it an assumption that you can read, and I'll be talking, and we're going to run through approximately 50 slides in 50 minutes. So it's a relatively intense commentary of elements to pick up, but I'll give you a summary sheet that you'll receive tomorrow as a result of the email follow-up. Again, the collaboration effect is all about enhancing relationships, resources, and revenues, and we're going to be applying this to working through change. It's all about first connecting relationships. So really connecting. How well do you know the person at work, outside of work, what their interests are, what their goals are? How well have you connected with another person? The second element is actively listening, and we're just going to do a brief actively listening exercise. But most of us don't realize active listening is actually work. It takes a real concerted effort to really listen to someone else. We're going to talk about that. The third element is judiciously educating. That's not selling someone else. That's educating someone as you would a judge. A judge is a decision maker, and in trial, an expert isn't there to be an advocate for their client. An expert isn't there to really be an advocate for their opinion. The expert is there to educate the judge so the judge can make a decision. You're going to try and work off of this particular element on the third component. And the fourth is negotiating closure and bringing that home. But today I'm going to focus on, again, leading your work group through change. And one of the key elements with the collaboration effect is actively listening. So the first thing I want to do is just tell you a personal story. I was a manager. I managed a group of nearly all guys, one gal. A year later, I picked up a new group as a frontline manager. I've got over 25 years in management experience, frontline level to executive level, and I've been teaching courses like this now for over 15 years. But I took over another group, and that group was made up of one guy and all the rest were gals. About 2 weeks into that, I knew something wasn't right, but I didn't know what it was. So I asked one of the participants in the group. Her name was Gail. Gail was a very nice person. When I asked her this question in my office, her face got kind of red, and she looked at me and said, "Well, Mike, there are times when we come to your office, all we want you to do is just listen." So I listened to Gail, and I said, "I'm going to bring this up in a group meeting." And I did. And I said, "Can you help me with this to the group?" And I think they felt sorry for me, but they said, "Okay, we'll try and help you, Mike." So what they did is they developed a code word. The code word was blue. If they came to my door's open, they knocked on the side of the door, I'd say, "Come on in." As they came in, they said the code word blue. I pushed away from my desk and my computer. I rolled on my chair with the rollers over to a small table. I had a pad of paper and a pen, and what I did is I listened. And when I listened, I paraphrased, I summarized, I asked open-ended questions, and I empathized. But I did not provide any solutions. And what I found out is 9 times out of 10, if I just kept asking questions, they could sort it out. They came up with the answer. They remembered it. They took it. They were happy, and they were able to apply it going forward. Instead of me thinking as the manager I had to provide the solution, they figured it out. I was so excited by this. I came home. I told my wife's name is Roma. I came home, I said, "Roma, I had an aha moment today at work relative to listening and actively listening to someone else." My wife looked at me, she put her hands on her hips, and she said, "You know, you can do more of that at home too." Well, I'm telling you that story so that you might think about this too in terms of actively listening when you're going to lead your work group through change, and we'll talk about that. Now, collaboration, there's the definition. You're basically just helping to create something new. You're working with other folks to try and do something. But the real key is it's not about me, rather it's about us. What are we going to do? What are we going to do together? That's what we're doing in our leading a work group through change. And when we go through and we think of change, Oftentimes we think of change negatively, and that's part of a survival component, and we'll talk about that here in a few moments too. The reason change is difficult is because we think of negative change and how we have gone through that process, and we bring in the two stinky twins of BO and BS, that is blaming others or blaming self. But to understand change, we need to remember change is constant. And there's the way that we did things, there's a new way we're going to be doing it, and it involves a host of different things. It involves interpersonal components, changes on technology, we're going to the SAP system, whatever it might be, and information on how we address things previously isn't the same now. It's different than what we used to do. And that in itself is kind of scary with, we're not sure what that means. When we go through change, we don't know what's necessarily going to happen. When we go through change, it tends to be gradual, but it could be any kind of a transition going forward, and it impacts you personally and how you emotionally feel. We'll talk about that. It involves others, and those stakeholders can be up the organization, down the organization, peers that you work with, stakeholders, customers, vendors, a whole host of different people. And knowing that you knew something before and now it's changing, there's some concern as to what might happen with this transition associated with change. But all change involves three things. There's an ending component and a beginning component. We usually think about that as two phases, but there are really three. And the third phase is the neutral zone. We're going to talk about endings, the neutral zone, and beginnings. And knowing those, how we can deal with this ourselves as leaders, and how we can address this when we're working with our team, and understanding the emotional needs that we have and the emotional needs of our teams. Well, just to define these, on endings, whatever it was that happened, we know what happened, we have to address what happened, we have to accept what's happened, and we're going to have to go forward knowing something is ending. So knowing that something has changed, we're going to have to just let it go. It sounds easy, but sometimes that loss can be very powerful and very strong on us. From there, we can go to a neutral zone. We're not sure what's going to happen going forward. On the one hand, there's some organized chaos. That doesn't sound good. On the other hand, it's an opportunity going forward. So which is it going to be? Is it going to be overall positive? Is it going to be overall neutral? Is it going to be overall negative? We've got certain rules. We knew how things worked. We knew what to expect. But now we're not so sure. And maybe it might be okay, and maybe it might not. And not knowing what it is, in fact, causes us some anguish. But how we respond after we've gone through the ending components and think about where we're going left us into the second zone called the neutral zone. And it might lead us to the new beginnings. Now, that looks like a panacea with those two characters. Everything's positive, new beginnings. Well, sometimes yes and sometimes no. There will be new elements going forward. Are we going to have the same values we had before? Different values? What's the culture like there? How about the attitudes of the people? Did we have good attitudes? We're moving into some with not so good, vice versa. How do we identify ourselves? I had a role, I had a title, I had things that I do. Now, whatever I'm doing might be different, and how is that going to impact us? In theory, let's say with a merger or acquisition, productivity is supposed to go up. Well, turns out, looking at all the S&P 500 acquisitions between 2000 and 2019, an economist, Aswath Damodaran at NYU, New York University, came back and said 10% of those resulted in a return on investment that was greater than the cost of capital to that company. So that's good. 30% did not have a return greater than the cost of capital, but about the same as the cost of capital. But the other 60% were actually resulted in losses relative to the acquisition. So there's the theory that management thinks, yes, it's going to be more productive, but standing back, maybe all they wanted were the customer lists, maybe just the technology, or maybe just certain brands, who knows what. But what will take place with new beginnings remains to be seen. But for you as a leader now, you have to approach this as we've got to make the best we can with what's going forward. Now, those are the three elements: endings, neutral, and beginnings. Let's go back and look at this now, starting again with endings. When the ending takes place, what's going to take place? Grief. Grief is going to take place. There's going to be sadness associated with it. I had a certain amount of status with what I did. I knew who I had to connect with and how I was connecting with them. I knew what the future offered. The future was going to be much like today. I know what I did for my job. I didn't have any questions about my job. Now I don't know what's going to happen with my job necessarily. That makes me feel like I've lost a sense of control. I may have friendships that some of my friends are going to leave. Maybe I'm going to leave, which is a big change, and I'm going somewhere else. But it's natural to have a grieving process when there are some elements that are lost associated with change. That just makes a lot of common sense. So as a leader, what do? Well, first you've got to acknowledge it as a leader. We're going to go through this change, and you have to own it. You have to be open to your team and what their concerns are. You need to be empathetic with them. You have to actively listen. We started off with actively listening. You have to actively listen. Now, whatever's happened in the past, we do want to celebrate whatever it is we've done before. But let's say it's a major reorganization. I was in an organization where it was announced we had 264 employees, and by a year from now, we're going to have 128. Well, that went over like a lead balloon. Holy smokes, am I one of the 128 that's going to be here or not? And if I am here, what's the job going to be like, and how are things going to be different? Just think of how that felt to hear that announcement. We had outstanding management at that organization, and we had periodic set up monthly briefings, and we had briefings that at one point or another the leader of the organization would bring us all together in an auditorium and say, I want to address some rumors. I want to let you know what's going on. He really focused on the things we're going to talk about. We're going to get there with transparency and listening and actively working with your employees. But on the element when you first find this out, everybody has to process it. You have to be a leader and remain positive, even when that's very hard. But one of the things you can plan on is, how are we going to celebrate the past? Are we going to have a potluck? Are we all going to go out for lunch together? What are we going to do to acknowledge this loss? We're going to need to do something as we go forward. And then we can move into this neutral zone, your own emotional reactions. If you've ever watched the movie Saving Private Ryan, at one point in the movie, Captain Miller is walking across a French field. He's with his team of a half dozen other soldiers. And they said, we think this mission we're on to try and save one private and risk all of our lives to do this, this is a FUBAR meeting. It's all followed up beyond all recognition. We shouldn't be on this mission. And they said, hey, Captain Miller, if you were to complain with this, how would you complain? And Captain Miller responds, first of all, you're a ranger. I'm a ranger. We never complain down. Let that sink in. We never complain down. We only complain up. Think about that as a leader. We never complain down. We only complain up. Valuable lesson there. Then he proceeded to say, well, if I was talking to the major, I would say something like this. I'm very happy to give my life and the life of these 6 men in order to save Private Ryan. A little bit sarcastic there, of course. But also, he understands that's the mission. That's what they have to do. To which one of the other members of the group says, hey, I love him. I love him. So they understood his sense of humor with that. But the key was he had a mission. He had to understand the mission. He's going forward with the mission. Now stand back and look at yourself and say, how will I benefit? Maybe you will, and maybe you won't. How about the organization? Maybe our part of the organization is going to, or maybe our part of the organization isn't. If there are opportunities and positives, we want to really emphasize those. If there aren't, we have to recognize that, go with the emotion that's associated with it, and go forward. But as commented earlier, there's a lot we don't know. We just don't know. But the one thing we do know, just like that slide I had with the couple and the new baby, we know we're in it together. We don't know what's going to happen going forward, but we're in it together. And the we is the key, and that you're the leader that has to address the change with the work group going forward. So now we need to initiate some new beginnings. With the new beginning, is that a sunrise or a sunset on the left? I don't know. I'm going to look at it, though, as a sunrise. And you're going to have to decide how you're going to react. How are you going to address this yourself as the leader, that you're not Pollyanna, like those 2 little kids that it's a new beginning and they're happy to go off to school, but rather I have to address this emotionally for myself first as the leader. I have to go through the endings, the neutral, the new beginnings. Take care of yourself first. It's just like on the airlines. Before you put on the mask for your child, put your mask on first and then give the mask to the child. You have to address your own emotions first. Take care of yourself first. And then you're going to have to share information, and you're going to be as transparent as you can be. We're going to talk about the elements of trust with sharing and being open and accepting and responsible. We'll talk about that in a few moments. But you're going to share information as much as you can, and you're going to work through the elements of change with your group. We said to do that, you have to let go of the old things. You're now the leader. I'm talking to you as a leader. You're a change leader. When you're examining what you're going to do going forward, everything is on the table. Anything that's how we did do it, that's fine. That's how we did do it. But now that we're going forward, everything that we have is on the table. All of our processes, all of our people, whatever we've done. We may even have some time left on certain things, but you know what? We may have to abandon those because we're going forward with whatever this new element might be. If we were actually live rather than on a webinar, I would actually say take some time with the table you're at or the person that's next to you, and I'd say, what are some examples from your experiences? We've all had them. Changes in processes, changes in software, could be a new evaluation system, could be we've got new standards, it could be a host of different things. But as the leader, you have to make the point that we're going to have to let it go. Even though that's what we did, we're going to have to let it go. And as I said, it's all about us. It's about we. What are we going to do? Not the me, although we have to address how I'm feeling. It's not the me. It's what are we going to do? And everybody's looking to you. They're looking to you on everything you do, everything you say. So as the leader, you have to model the change. You're going to be as transparent as you can be with others. You're going to share this in various forms, one-on-one and in meetings. You want to make sure you don't leave anybody out. You don't want to have somebody thinking, well, how did they know that and I didn't get to know that? So you have to be even more proactive with your communication going forward. You're going to involve others, so outside of your group and others. And some people are going to have a harder time with this than others, and that's okay. What does that mean? That means you're going to have to be more involved with listening with empathy for those that are having a harder time. You want to make this into an opportunity. Oftentimes when things go bad, something didn't work out right, somebody didn't do what they were supposed to, we give them feedback. Well, that's not necessarily the healthiest way to go forward. In one of my books, it's called The Sermon Manager, 203 tips from the best places to work in America. One of the tips is feed forward. Feed forward is critical. Instead of, you screwed up, you're going to approach it as, let's talk about what happened. What did we learn from what happened? And what are, the key word here is we. What are we going to do going forward so we don't have that happen again? That's a creative learning environment. I'm on this with you. We're going through this together. And we're going to work to make whatever this is going forward an improvement. Now, I happen to work with some neuroscientists. I've been working with them now for, it's almost 6 years. It's not that I'm a neuroscientist, but I want to share some things with you here. It turns out at the top of our brainstem, that's the amygdala. That's the top of the brainstem. It's oftentimes called the reptilian brain, but that's the part that in 6 to 10 seconds causes us to flood our body with various chemicals and hormones. When we flood, we get really angry. We've all lost it. We've all said things we wish we hadn't said. We've been angry. We've shouted at someone else. We have 6 to 10 seconds to stop ourselves from getting angry. And in general, at work, we don't let ourselves get angry. And the reason for that is because of our prefrontal cortex on the right. That's about 5% of the brain mass. It's about 25% of the energy of the brain. And the prefrontal cortex can override the amygdala. So often when we think about change, we start to get kind of angry, but we can control that angry with the prefrontal cortex. But again, we have 6 to 10 seconds to stop that. And if we do indeed flood and get angry, those chemicals and hormones stay with us for up to 22 hours or until we have a sleep cycle. So it's important, if we're leaders, we're starting to get angry, that we don't let ourselves get angry. Be very conscious of that. Now, not everybody's on board. Now you know a little bit about this element of the prefrontal cortex and the amygdala. How do you overcome a resistance to change? Well, so you're going to get your employees involved with you, especially the naysayers. Get them involved with you. How are we going to do this? You want people to be honest with you. You want to have a radical candor. You want to have a candor that people are being open and honest. You want to encourage that. In the past, oftentimes what's happened is various issues were ignored. We didn't bother to let folks voice that, or we shut it down. There are ways you can shut it down very quickly in a meeting, just let folks know interpersonally you're not interested. Here, we want to have and encourage honest communication. When someone says something, when you say this, when you said that, this is what I think, this is what I feel, is a way to share with them what you think they're saying and what you think they feel. They might say, no, that's not how I feel. This is how I feel. Or they may say, that is how I feel. But you want to encourage that and acknowledge what things are working and what things are not. You want to overcome that resistance no matter how severe it is. Here's a huge wave. I'm a Midwest guy. I'm in Minneapolis, St. Paul. I look at that wave and this person going out in the wave as a surfer and I go, that looks pretty dangerous to me. That's a pretty big wave. I've been in some fairly large waves, nothing like that. But there's a natural apprehension and fear. And you're going to have to explain what are the benefits of this going forward. Talk about what it is they have fear about. You need to address what the costs are. And oftentimes we perceive the costs to be higher than they are. We tend to view things negatively, and that's for survival. But we need to address what are the issues going forward and how can we work together to address those, that I can trust and respect you, and you can trust and respect me too. Now, again, if you weren't on a webinar, I would say, let's talk with the person next to you. In your case, after this webinar, you might want to think about, what would I want to talk with some of my friends about at work, about what are our barriers to change? And then what ideas do we have in our group to overcome those barriers? And although we can't do this because this is a webinar, you might want to think about this or write this down and then think about, how can I do that later within my own group? What could I do with my own peers to address these kinds of things? I want to incorporate their ideas. This is an angry looking guy. And I don't know what he believes, but I know I'm not out to change his belief. But what I am out to do is to understand where his values come from. I want to understand his values, and if I can relate to his values, we can find a way to do this. I'm a mediator with the Minnesota Supreme Court. I've been a mediator there since 2004. I've done over 2,500 mediations and negotiations. That's my professional life. I'm a volunteer mediator. My passion is conflict resolution. I've mediated in housing court, conciliation court, in public housing, in neighborhood disputes, after police shootings, white police officers shooting black African American here in the Twin Cities. I've been involved with a number of different things, and I've mediated between gangs. Those are violent people who kill each other. Even in that environment, that guy has a mother. That guy has values. If we can find how to relate to the other person's values, we can go a long way towards de-escalation and working together to resolve issues. Now, de-escalation is taking a higher level of negative energy and bringing it back to a more neutral level of energy. But we have to recognize that can really happen. And in terms of choices, we all look at different opportunities differently based on our own backgrounds. So, for example, there's a great story on the internet. It's about a Cherokee grandfather. He's talking to his grandson. He tells his grandson, we all have two wolves inside of us. And one wolf is all about anger and hatred and bullying and harassment and being the winner to force the other one to lose and being mean and being retaliatory in nature. And then we have another wolf inside of us. That one's about love and kindness and caring and compassion and looking out for others and forgiveness. And the grandson looks up at the grandfather and says, well, grandfather, which wolf wins? And the grandfather says, whichever one you feed. So think about that for yourself and which wolf we feed. What computer games do we play? What movies do we watch? What news do we watch? What are the different influences on what we do? What's my religious perspective? All these things influence this for yourself. And then I'm going to say, stand back and think of the members of your work group and their life experiences and their choices along the way. And how quick are they to anger? And how quick are they to be peacemakers? And how quick are they to collaborate and work with others? You need to take those elements into account individually with the folks you're working with as you lead the work group through change. Here's just an example. That's an old-fashioned adding machine. In case you're wondering what that was, it was referred to as a computer back in the 1940s. But here's a story. Here's a bookkeeper. Bookkeeper knows how to do the bookkeeping, works with spreadsheets, knows all about Excel, is using a Microsoft system, but the business grew. So management said, we're going to implement a new type of software now that we're going to no longer need those spreadsheets. And the bookkeeper was asked to evaluate the different kinds of software. And the first one, it's like, nope, that's not going to work. Second one, nope, it's not going to work. Third one, nope, it's not going to work. So every single software program that was brought to the bookkeeper, bookkeeper said, it's not going to work. Well, management was not actively engaged on leading that work group through change. And they did not encourage radical candor of understanding. And so management said, you know what, we're just going to stay with the old system. And staying with the old system, the other employees complained that, hey, it's still taking us a long time to get our travel reimbursements. There's a lot of things in accounting that take a long time. They didn't deal with the problem. So in dealing and addressing the problem, they could have talked to the bookkeeper. They could have explained to the bookkeeper why they want to do this. They want to have the bookkeeper help, but in the end, they're going to have to come up with a new software package. So help us decide which one, but the answer isn't we're not going to have the change take place. So I'm sharing that with you as an example. As it turns out, our brains are 98% emotional and 2% rational. Let that sink in. I got a couple of engineering degrees, bachelor's and master's. I have an MBA in finance. I am your analytical guy. I have a number of initials behind my name. I am your analytical guy. I'm like Spock, okay? That having been said, when they told me, working with a neuroscientist, we're 98% emotional and 2% rational, I said, it's got to be at least 50-50. But I've learned a lot. So I'm going to share something with you. Help me out on this math problem. How much is 2 plus 2? Everybody online just came up with the number 4. Now, you didn't do this, yes, it's 4, but you said, I got it, it's 4. When you did that, you gave your brain a drop of dopamine. You reinforced that you knew the 2 plus 2 is 4. That's how our brains reinforce elements going forward. In terms of priorities, we all only have 3. I don't know what yours are. Took me a while to figure mine out. We only have 3. So mine are faith and family and fun. I work for those 3 things. Those are my 3 priorities in life. And you need to figure out what your priorities are, and then try to see if you can help figure out what the priorities are for the other people that you're working with. What are their priorities? And in terms of impacts, we look for food, water, sex, and shelter. Anything else that's brought up as new, our initial response is negative. That's all about safety. That's helped us for thousands of years. Something's new, I don't know what it is, but until I see that's really good, I'm going to presume it's bad. That's our natural inclination. So be aware, we're 98% emotional. We have 3 priorities. And in terms of impacts, we look for food, water, sex, and shelter, and it's going to negatively impact those, or we don't know, we think of it as negative. So if we're going to help our team go forward, we have to develop trust, whether it be from an Eastern culture or a Western culture, or Native American that looks at Mother Earth and a rock as a trusting component. We have to first seek to understand. We've got to keep our promises and kindnesses. But for me, I use an acronym relative to trust to help me with this. And the acronym I use is SOAR, S-O-A-R. S is I need to be straightforward. I need to be honest and operate with integrity. I need to be straightforward. I need to be open. What does it mean to be open? It means to be transparent. If I legally, morally, ethically can share it with you, I should probably share it with you. There may be some things that are so sensitive, I really be careful here. But in general, I want to be as transparent as I can be to incorporate trust. I want to be accepting. That means, again, avoiding the 2 stinky twins of BO and BS, blaming others or blaming self. And instead, be hard on the problem and soft on the people. That's what it means to be accepting. And finally, it's that you're reliable. You can count on me. You need to be able to count on me. If a plumber says I can get the job done in a day and it gets done in half a day, life is good. Plumber says I can get it done in a day and it takes 2 days, not so good. So you want to under-promise and over-deliver. So be straightforward, open, accepting, and reliable. And in terms of collaboration, it's about trying to discover and understand, engaging others in the process, collectively working to develop a creative solution, and then develop a strategy for deployment, and then come back and look at it and say, let's look at the results, how do they do in terms of business metrics? How about social interaction? How about employee satisfaction, customer satisfaction? Let's look at the results and say, how well did they work? Do we need to do something differently? But to collaborate together on the change. In terms of communication, Google's pretty good, but once in a while Google screws up. This is a screw up on Google. It's not communication, it's the attitude associated with communication. 7% of the attitude associated with communication is associated with the words. Think of the text, think of texting someone, think of email. 38% of the attitude is associated with the words, associated with their tone. So at least if I can talk to you on the phone, if you can hear me online here, you get some perception of my attitude simply because of the tone. But 55% is associated with our body language and facial expression. So if we want to ideally address change, it's best to do that face to face. If not, over the phone, but certainly not by email or text. So one of the firms I helped out with strategic planning, they actually had a rule that said, we went through 2 iterations. I send something to you on email, you send it to me, that's 1 iteration. So I send it back to you and you send it back to me, that's 2 iterations back and forth. They said at that point, you don't send a 3rd email on that topic. At that point, you pick up the phone if you're in different offices, or if you're in the same office, you walk over and talk to the people at that site because something isn't being communicated effectively here. So you want to be face to face. Just to share a book with you, Conversational Intelligence. I have this book, and this is one of the graphics out of it. On the left is talking about negative elements, fight, flight, freeze. That's the amygdala kicking in. That's a high level of cortisol. That's resistance and low trust. And on the right-hand side, we see positive elements over here. We see how we're working together. We see trust. We see that oxytocin. When women give birth, and they have their first interaction with the new baby, that's the highest level of oxytocin a person ever has. I can tell you a story, but in a nutshell, when our first child was born, that was my highest high I've ever had in my life. So I come back in and say, that's on the positive side with really high oxytocin. If we can build trust and co-create with our other members of our team, that makes us feel really good. And it's the oxytocin is the chemical that's bringing that home. If I ask you how many sides are there to a coin, some of you would say 2, some of you would say 3. And the answer is there are 3 sides to a coin. So bringing that home, how does that tie into our presentation? Well, in a conflict, there's my side, there's your side, and there's the truth. My side, your side, and the truth. And as we work through change, the objective is to bring out the real truth so we can really work together as a team to address the changes going forward. And in terms of listening, we want to be actively listening. When I make presentations as a keynote, I did this once, I've done this many times, but once in front of 1,200 people, and even in a group that size, I said, I want you to team up with someone that you don't know, so you have to get up and move. And I want you to think about something you have a conflict about at home, work, somebody cut you off on traffic on the way there, something, and I want you to discuss that with the other person. And when you do that, all I want you to do is paraphrase, summarize, ask open-ended questions, and empathize. That's all you can do. You cannot provide any solutions. So I did that for 5 minutes. And after that, I try and bring them back. And it's tough to bring them back because I don't want to quit talking. Then I said, okay, I want you to switch. Whoever was listening, you now are speaking. And for those of you who are listening now, again, paraphrase, summarize, ask open-ended questions, and empathize. And they do that. And again, it's tough to bring them back, but I bring them back. And then I say to them, how do you feel right now? I always get this. I feel good. People shout that out in the audience. I feel good. I feel good. Okay, they feel good. I said, now I have some questions for you. When's the last time somebody listened to you for 5 minutes? And they shake their heads no. Then I said, when's the last time you listened to somebody for 5 minutes that you were in conflict with? And oftentimes I'm leading the work group through change. There are conflicts there. We want to help them work their way through this. We need to actively listen with what it is they have to say. So the keys to active listening, and I said that's the one emphasis in today's presentation with leading work groups through change is active listening. We're going to focus on that one. Is again, paraphrase, summarize, ask open-ended questions, and empathize. That's the key. Now, some people think it's all about who owns the road. Do I own the road? Am I the leader I'm expected to bring us through this? And the reality is we need to share the road. But when you share the road with others, we also still need some rules. We need some boundaries here. We still have a yellow line down the middle. You get half the road, but you don't get the middle half. You get the right side or the left side. So we have to find out how we can work together to share the road. It's not management leading. It's us collectively moving forward with the changes in process. So you got to ask yourself, what would it take? What would it take for you to lead, change, and take advantage of this collaboration effect? What would you have to do differently? Hopefully, with what I presented to you, there's some thoughts that you said, you know, this is something I could do in my group. And again, if we weren't in a webinar, I'd say, can you write something down, something that you could do differently based on what you've heard so far in today's presentation? Well, one of my books is called Peaceful Resolutions. For everybody who buys the book, they get this pocket guide. It's opens up into 3 little sections. It can fit in your pocket. It's a pocket guide with peaceful resolutions. If you send me your email, and I'm not going to put you on any list to get my newsletter unless you want to be on my newsletter, but I'll send this out to you electronically, this 3-tier pocket guide. And the most important part of this pocket guide is if you open it up through the first of the 3 sections, it says helping questions for exploring interests. And the first one on there is, what do you want to have happen? What do you want to have happen? And as folks begin to talk about what they want to have happen as you're working through change, those kind of open questions get people to talk about things they otherwise wouldn't have talked about. So as you think about the collaboration effect, again, it's about enhancing relationships, resources, and revenues. The relationships is building better, stronger, connecting relationships. In terms of resources, it's important in leading the work group through change to minimize the negativity. So it's greater resources because we're not wasting our time on the negative elements. And in terms of revenues, it gives us more time to concentrate and work on productivity enhancements and be better going forward. So what's it about? It's about connecting relationships. That's one of the elements on the collaboration effect. Actively listening is what we focused on here today. Judiciously educating, and then negotiating closure. What we said is it's not about me. And it's really critical as a leader manager to realize it's not about me. Rather, as presented earlier and presented here again, it's about us. I refer to my life as BC and AC. BC is before children. Before I had children, my wife and I, we had our life, we did things together, we did lots of things, it was fun, we were a young couple with no child. Then we had our first little baby, Amanda. And after that, I refer to my life as AC, after children. We were entirely focused on, we got this new life, this is a gift from God, we want to be good parents. It's all about us. It's change in perspective. And if you're a leader and you're working your work group through change, it's all about us. We tend to think as managers we have to have the solutions, we have to know what to do. The reality is it's okay. It's okay to tell your team, I don't know, and we don't know. I need your help. One of the greatest ways to show someone else that you respect them is to ask them for help. I need your help. We need to work this through together. That's what it's all about. So the focus on this is how to lead work groups through change. And what did we talk about here today? What we talked about is we need to apply this element of the collaboration effect. You really need to listen beyond what the surface comments are and get behind the other party's deepest concerns. You need to be there to help. You're a leader, you're a manager, you're there to help. You need to listen by paraphrasing, summarizing, asking open-ended questions, and empathizing. I'll send you the tool of that pocket guide if you'd like to get that pocket guide. I'll send it to you for free in electronic form. If you want it in paper form, send me your address. I can send it to you in paper form. You may wonder, why do I talk about this? Why do I do these kind of things? Well, I was in one particular district as an executive. I had 1,200 employees. We had 30 unfair labor practices, EEO complaints, and grievances. I was sent on detail to another geographic location, 1,200 employees there. But instead of 30, we had 300. After a week there, I said, I was the assistant director, I said to the director, I think I can put together a system to address this, but I need your support. And we had a union there too. And I said, I'm going to need to get your support, upper level, mid-level, frontline level management, human resources, labor relations, equal employment opportunity, the union, and collectively put together a system and train people in the system and test it and then implement that system. And 4.5 months later, we went from 300 to 30. We resolved 270 equal employment opportunity complaints, grievances, and unfair labor practices. Now, I've been on details for 4 or 5 months at a time. It's not a big deal. But when you leave, you normally have a coffee. It takes an hour and 20 people show up. 10 are there because you made some friends, and 10 are there, being frank, they're there to kiss butt with the director and the assistant director. That's the reality. At that location, when they had a coffee for me, 400 people showed up. It lasted 6 hours. I changed their lives. They changed mine. So when I talk about addressing these elements, I took what I learned from that particular detail I was on and said, I want to share with others what I've learned, and it's not that hard, it's not that complex, but these are the major items. I have a passion for conflict resolution. My mission is to provide top quality service by helping clients identify, address, and resolve issues. In short, do the right thing, do what it takes, and have fun. My wife says I no longer work for a living, I just have fun, and I tell people she's right, that's what I do. Well, I hope you learned some interesting things here today. I hope there's something that you can have as a takeaway that you can apply here at work, at home, or in your life. And I hope you can have some fun with what I presented here too. I'm a speaker, I'm a consultant, and I'm an author. If you know others that might benefit from something like this, I'd be happy to help them too. So with that, I'm going to pause now and come back and say, are there any questions or concerns that you have that you want to bring up to me? So I'm passing this back to you, Kendall.
Thank you so much for a great presentation, Mike. This concludes the presentation portion of our event today. We will now begin our Q&A session. If you have not yet submitted your questions, please do so now. Okay, Mike, our first question. Can you talk a little bit more about the difference between values and beliefs?
Yeah, a belief, for example, is something. I'm going to take a very sensitive topic. A very sensitive topic is abortion, and we have two sides. And one side says abortion is bad. Another side says abortion is good. That's a belief. I'm not out to change anybody's belief. But what kind of values might these two parties have that are in distinctly different camps? Do we care about women? Do we care about fetuses? Do we care about newborn babies? Would we like to reduce the number of unwanted pregnancies? Do we want to ensure that when a newborn child comes into the world and the parents don't want that child, what will happen with that child as that child grows up? Do we want to make sure that child's going to get enough food and has shelter and has a loving environment? Those are the kind of questions that come out of values versus beliefs. So when a question like this was asked, I'm in Minnesota, and with the state legislature here in Minnesota, there were some folks like me that were involved with facilitating on a topic of abortion to say, what are your values? And with the two parties that were in very different camps, they found out they had a lot of common values. And when they found out they had common values, that allowed them to figure out what their priorities might be within the state budget to address that issue. So I'm not going to change somebody's belief on abortion, yes or no. But I can look for what our common values are, and then focusing on those values, maybe we can find some things that we share in common to address those common values. That face I showed you, that mean guy a few minutes ago, and I talk about mediating between gangs. I can tell you every gang member has a mother. There's values because every gang member has a mother. And every gang member wants to live. And we begin to work with gang members and realize, you know, those are people too. God created every one of us, including that gang member. And when I work with gang members that have killed each other and help them resolve issues on a boundary line between the gangs, with some very militant gangs, if you know the terms, Puerto Rican Stones or Latin Kings, those are the gangs. We can work with those folks that are in a very militant perspective. You come back and think whatever it is we might have as issues at work or at home or in life, nobody's going to die. Nobody's going to die with most of the things that we're talking about here. So you put it in perspective, nobody's going to die. An old on-the-job instructor of mine was Wes Larson, a World War II vet. He was a Marine. He was at Iwo Jima, Guam, and Okinawa. He was the only guy in his unit to not get a Purple Heart or die in his platoon. And he would sometimes say to me when I was a young buck and I was much more hard charging and less mediation oriented, he'd say to me, Mike, you're all excited about this here at work, but Mike, no matter what happens, nobody's going to die. That was the best advice I got from my on-the-job instructor, Wes Larson. And I look at so much that we get concerned about, we get all keyed up on different things. We let the amygdala kick in and get angry about all sorts of things. But in reality, is it really that important? So focusing on the values, as I just commented, that's really the key to working with others when we have potential conflicts, and let's just say within our work group. Long answer, but I hope that helps.
Thank you so much. Okay, our next question. As someone who is resistant to change, do you have any advice on how I can be more receptive to change?
Well, I gave some examples in here, some of the commentary is, and this is a high, big picture now. Realize that what we need to do is understand there are endings, and it's okay to grieve endings. It's okay to have grief. Grief is a very natural thing, but understand it and then celebrate what's happened historically. Celebrate what the good things were that we had. Move yourself into a more neutral perspective going forward. So you had to de-escalate yourself. You had to go through the endings. You need to go into the neutral zone. And then, okay, what are we going to do going forward? How are we going to address this? Again, the commentary on feed forward. We need to focus on, okay, this is the situation. What are we going to do going forward? If there was a bad thing, what are we going to do to avoid that in the future and to be more positive with this going forward? What are we going to do? It's okay to have grief. Because we're in this together, we need to take positive steps to overcome resistance. We need to look for whatever our common values are. We need to be part of the solution rather than being part of the problem. We're leaders. We need to be part of the solution. So what can I do to help others through this process? So build trust, be straightforward, open, accepting, and they can count on you in terms of being reliable. And actively listen to others and reflect back what they've said. So paraphrase, summarize, ask open-ended questions, and empathize. So for me personally, it means I have to recognize those things. And recognizing those things as a leader, I need to center myself first, address how I can deal with this personally, and then come back to help my team. I hope that helps.
Yes, it does. Thank you. Okay, that is all the time that we have for questions today. I want to thank you all for your participation. And that is all that we have for today. I want to go ahead and thank our sponsors, M&M Specialty Services and VAA LLC, for their support in bringing you today's webinar. And I also want to thank GEAPS and our presenter, Mike Gregory, for joining us today. The GEAPS Leadership Education and Networking Workshop offers new grain industry professionals and experienced leadership alike an opportunity to sharpen leadership skills, gain practical insights, and expand their professional networks. All grain industry professionals, GEAP members, and non-members are invited to attend. The workshop will be held at the Intercontinental St. Paul Riverfront on July 16th and 17th. For more information on registration, please visit jeeps.com. As a reminder, oh, go ahead.
This is a plug. I'll go ahead and state I will be there on the afternoon of the 16th for a couple of hours, and I'm with you all morning on the 17th. So if you can make that, I look forward to seeing you there in person.
Thank you so much, Mike. As a reminder, this webinar has been recorded and it will be available for viewing on grainnet.com within 24 hours, and all registrants will also receive an email containing a link to the recording and the presentation slides. Our next webinar with GEAPS will be held on Tuesday, June 25th at 10 a.m. Central Time. Ross McElhenney, Project Manager at Louis Dreyfus Company, will be discussing utilizing laser scanning with your next facility project. I want to thank you all for attending, and I wish you all a great day.